Okay, if you please take your seats. We'll begin the program in a few seconds here as you find your seats. Plenty of good seats still available. David, Jim? Well, it's a beautiful day for tennis, and Mike would have liked that. Not a memorial service, but a celebration of life, and we're glad you're here. I'm Ray Collins. I live here in Sarasota, and I was absolutely honored to find out that they wanted me to do the service today. We've got a wonderful program about a fellow who would have turned 80 years old today. It sounds unusual, but Mike really did envision how he wanted this day. He said, I want two things. I can't do the accent, but he said, I want two things. I want people drinking and talking about me. I'm not sure which order, but that was the idea. That was the edict that we had today. And Mike would be pleased by this turnout. It's quite a who's who in the tennis world from around the world. You'll meet most of them today, and I'll outline the other ones who don't want to speak but are here as well. We're quite a dignified crowd. Also, after we have a few speakers, we'll have a bit of an open mic for others, pardon the pun, for others who want to speak as well about Mike. Mike Davies or Mike Davis, take your pick. Mina might tell us the story about how there are two pronunciations to the last name, depending where you're from. I learned that recently. I last talked to Mike in September. I interviewed him about 100 yards away in the other clubhouse. And I interviewed him for a local magazine, and I had my back to the door. And every few minutes, somebody would come in and interrupt us, and he was always very kind. And half an hour into it, somebody else opened the door, and the way his eyes lit up, I knew this next person was somebody special. And it was. Please say hello and welcome Mina Davies.
Noodle knees, oof. Okay. Thank you, Ray. First and foremost, I want to thank my Landings family of friends. I've known most of you now going on about 16 years. And during this time of my life, your words of encouragement and compassion have left me with a sense that it will be better and I'm never really alone. So for that, I'm very grateful. I want to thank another dear friend that was very close to Mike, and it is John Zachary. John has been a very good friend for me and has been here every day as Mike's passing. There were other, oh boy, I lost my place, that's horrible. Mike and John were very close, and they were on the courts at least 3 days a week. We even followed John to Vermont for a month so Mike could keep hitting with him. It was kind of fun. And John, I know Mike's passing has greatly affected you, and I do appreciate everything you've done for me and Mike. My volunteers for today, I want to acknowledge Mama Martha Sherlong for the chocolates and all around aid for me. Adrian Feltman, all the beautiful flowers. Barbara Pendrell, Sharon Dice, extraordinaires at everything. And big sis, Dee Dee Recapito, and little sis, my little sis, Brenda Thompson. There's some people that couldn't make it here due to health issues and previous engagements. And Mike held these people and friends very close and true to his heart. Some go back thank you. Some go back to as far as 65, 70 years. Ann Hutchins, soulmate friend since they were 14 years old. So Ann and Clive Hutchins. Billy Knight, Roger Becker, Davis Cup buds. and Marshall Happard, special friend and colleague. So with all that being said, let's celebrate and honor on this special 9th day of January, husband, father, and friend, Michael Grenfell Davies.
One of the many dignitaries we have here today came all the way from Los Angeles. One night there after being in Las Vegas the previous night. He's a busy guy, and we're all honored that he is here. The founder of the Tennis Channel, Ken Solomon. Ken?
This will be uncharacteristically brief for all of you that know me. I know. So, one thing this is actually I'm just going to tee up a piece of film here. As everybody here knows, Mike was a showman, maybe the consummate showman of our sport and industry. And I can tell you this, there would be no Tennis Channel without him. And not only do I know that, but everybody who works at our company knows that. And so when Mike passed, and we were talking regularly right up until that moment, but I'll tell you that story later, everyone felt compelled to dedicate our coverage of the ATP Men's World Tour Finals from Barclays at the O2 Center to Mike. And if you'll recall, it was also during another small world event that was going on in Paris. But we put them on equal footing. And so we thought it would just be nice to have, again, in trying to channel Mike and how he might want to produce this, other than having Ray, who's doing such a good job. We may have to offer him a contract before this thing's over. We thought we'd just show this little piece that was written and produced by our team and John Wertheim, who's the executive editor of Sports Illustrated, to tell the world what most of you know about some of Mike's contributions. This is just a nice small piece that ran right before the final match of the ATP Men's World Tour Finals.
Playing their hearts out. Sunshine, skill, physicality.
Thank you for getting the women in there.
Contributions to the sport went well beyond his ability to hit a ball.
You got it. One more time.
Mike Davies' contributions to the sport went well beyond his ability to hit a ball over a net with force and accuracy. Upon his retirement, Davies served as the WCT chief executive. In this role, he revealed himself to be as skilled at marketing tennis as he was at playing tennis. From organizing a circuit to staging a tournament to selling sponsorships, Davies' fingerprints were soon all over professional tennis, and they remain there today. But above all, he was ahead of his time in recognizing that television was going to be the lifeblood of every sport. The yellow ball, that's Davies' innovation, a way to make it more TV friendly. Players wearing colored attire, that's Davies' brainchild too, coinciding with color TVs. Allowing 90 seconds on changeovers, Davies again a nod to networks which could air 3 30-second commercials in that slot. Not for nothing was he inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in 2012.
Thank you all at the Hall of Fame for keeping our sport alive. There are still some of us left to remember where we came from.
As Stan Smith, a fellow Hall of Famer and WCT player for Davies, put it, quote, "Our sport is what it is today because of Mike's leadership." On November 2nd, Mike Davies passed away at age 79. Another one of Davies' many innovations, devising a year-ending, television-friendly tour event that could serve as the annual grand finale. A grand finale for the sport he loved, the sport he served.
Thank you, Ken. It was wonderful. Gave me the chills again. I saw it during lunch, and I love to see it again. Amazing. I thought of a funny story that I shared with you earlier about Mike told me a story about the time he was trying to set up an exhibition. I think it was in Iran. I'm sure some of you in the audience know the story better than I do. And he said to the organizer in Iran, "Who will we use for line judges?" And in Iran, a person said, we've got some snipers who have excellent eyesight, and no one ever questions their calls. He loved that story, and so did I. The next person we're going to bring up right now was the person who was on the stage and helped induct Mike into the Hall of Fame a few years ago. She now runs the Connecticut Open after he did. Please welcome a classy lady, Ann Worcester. Ann.
It's so wonderful and exciting to see how many people are here, and for those of us who have grown up in tennis, legends of tennis in this room to honor and celebrate Mike. Stan Smith. We have two of the original handsome 8, Butch Buchholz and Cliff Drysdale in the room. How cool is that? The fact that you guys are still handsome. And how handsome is Mike Davis in those photos, you all? Oh my gosh, so handsome. And the fact that Ken Solomon came from LA and Christopher Stokes came from London. We have 6 staff members from the Connecticut Open who flew in this morning, representatives of the WTA, the ATP, the International Tennis Hall of Fame, and Wimbledon. I mean, this is just, Mike would tell us all, don't come, don't bother, but I know he is smiling down upon us all today, I really do. So yes, I had the honor of presenting him into the Tennis Hall of Fame, and basically, you know, yes, he was my boss for 16 years and my mentor and my dear, dear friend, but really the main reason he asked me is because Butch Buchholz said he wouldn't be able to get through it without crying. So I was the very proud and grateful pinch hitter for Butch Buchholz. And I just wanted to, I'm going to read that presentation. As Chris Klauser will tell you, I was the only one that stayed under the time limit, so don't worry, it's not too long. But I just want to share with you how we presented Mike into the Tennis Hall of Fame. It was one of the biggest honors of my life, and I think it was one of the happiest days of his life, too. The man that I have the honor of introducing today is a mentor, a friend, and probably the most extraordinary innovator and businessman our sport has ever known. So I'd like to take a couple minutes to paint a picture for you. The year is 1970. The open era in tennis is very new and the sport is still relatively unknown. On a yellow legal pad, a man sketches out a bold idea, one that seemed unimaginable at that time. A global tennis tour of 20 tournaments with a year-end final and $1 million in prize money. He broaches the idea with his then boss at World Championship Tennis, Lamar Hunt, who buys in. Neither could know it then, but this first tour would shape the future of professional tennis. Fast forward to 1972, and 2 of the all-time great tennis players, Ken Rosewall and Rod Laver, reach the WCT final. Rosewall wins in a dramatic 5-set tiebreak, but even more important than the victory was that the NBC televised match went so long that it preempted the evening news. And back in 1972, the evening news got huge ratings. And that meant that the tennis match got huge ratings, capturing the attention of TV viewers across the USA. So they realized they needed to deliver more of this WCT tour to the masses, and the vehicle to do that was clearly network television. So this bold, brave man walks into NBC to pitch them on broadcasting 8 WCT events in addition to the final. And NBC agrees with one major caveat. They tell him he has to raise $1 million in advertising dollars first, and then they will air the series. No one at NBC thought he, or anyone for that matter, could do it. The master salesman now needs to sell advertisers on his grand plan of a series of events in this nascent sport, an idea that hasn't ever been done before. He knows he needs to get creative, so he develops some gimmicks. A first ever refrigerator on court to keep the balls at optimum temperature. A first ever tip of the day for each broadcast, and more. Companies like Wilson, Volkswagen, Polaroid, and others line up, and he has his $1 million in advertising. Big time tennis is on its way in the United States. Over the next few years, tennis explodes, participation rises, from 11 million players to 33 million. Indoor courts are built everywhere. Racket, shoe, clothing sales, and everything else tennis-related takes off. But he doesn't stop innovating. He introduces concepts that are mainstays in today's game. Players wearing colored clothing, the yellow tennis ball, which showed up better on television, placing chairs on the court for players during changeovers, rules like 30 seconds between points and 90 seconds between games, and he even instituted the tiebreak. Over his tennis career, this one man created a masterpiece, one that forever changed how we view and we interact with our sport. He never stopped innovating, and subsequently his 50 years in the sport have created a work of art that will hang forever in the Tennis Hall of Fame. It is my privilege and my honor to introduce someone whose accomplishments and contributions will impact tennis for generations to come. He has left an indelible mark on our sport, and his legacy will live on forever. Now that's a true Hall of Famer. Ladies and gentlemen, I present you Mike Davis. I came down to visit Mike and Mina in September, hoping it wasn't my last goodbye, but it turned out to be. I was very lucky. Mike was feeling great that day. We had a wonderful lunch. He insisted on driving and showing me all over Sarasota. We went to the beach. He insisted that we get out and feel the sand on our toes. Illegally. And we just had a great day. And so many people wanted to say goodbye to him, but couldn't. So I made a mementos box for him. And I collected emails and missives and articles and photos, anything anybody wanted to send me, and I brought him this straw box. And I left it with him that day. And he wrote me a beautiful thank you note a couple days later. But I was reading some of those missives that I still have on email in preparation for today, and I was struck by the patterns I saw. Virtually everyone talked about how Mike was such a teacher, and how much we all learned from him and how he shared his wisdom. One person wrote, Mike was truly blessed with the kind of natural creative intelligence that left the rest of us in awe. Even better, he never failed to share his thinking with all who worked for him and with him so that we could be and do better. My own staff, who's here in spades today from the Connecticut Open, they all wrote to him about how much he valued their opinion. You know, some of them were in their 20s, the early 20s when they started with him. He sought and valued everyone's opinions and made everyone feel so important. What a great way to teach and grow and motivate young people. Personally, I left the WTA in 1998 because I wanted to raise a family, and Butch Buchholz, who was one of my first bosses in tennis 30 years ago, said, come help us run the then Pilot Pen in New Haven. Come run the Pilot Pen with Mike Davis. And I knew Mike Davis was this, legend and legendary pioneer in our sport, but I never had worked with him. And little did I know that he would teach me so much and become a mentor and become one of my dearest friends in the whole wide world. So Mike and I were a great team because we were good at different things. And Butch used to say, Ann sees the donut and Mike sees the hole. So I'm very grateful for that, Butch. And I'm so grateful for my day with Mike and Mina in September. Mike gave me, I'm sure Mina helped with this, Mike gave me this beautiful bracelet that day which says, you are always in my heart. And that sums up how I feel about Mike Davis. You are always in my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Beautiful speech and very well delivered as well that you reread for us from the Hall of Fame a few years ago. Well, let's continue on that path and bring up another, the founding fathers of tennis, a fellow who also brought the then Lipton to Key Biscayne, which became the NASDAQ and the Sony Ericsson and the Sony. He can attract major sponsors. One of the founding fathers of modern tennis, Butch Buchholz, folks.
I'm not sure if we get through this again.
I'll help you.
Okay, there's definitely next down there.
I think Mike and I met, I think, 1958, 1959, and I saw him hit maybe one of the best shots I've ever seen in tennis. He was playing at Forest Hills. In those days, it was not the U.S. Open. It was, I don't know, it was called Forest Hills. Anyway, he got a lob over his head, ran all the way back, literally a racket space from the wall, and hit a backhand like this. His back was to the wall, hit it, and passed fixation. Mike turned pro in middle of 1960, and he was part of a strategy that Jack Kramer had, and the idea was that we're going to force open tennis. Now, a lot of people still think that, or believe that tennis was always the way it is today, that everybody could go play the U.S. Open, play the French, play Wimbledon. That was not the case. When you turned pro, you were banned, and you couldn't play those events anymore. So Jack Kramer had this idea in 1960 with a gentleman by the name of Philippe Chatrier, who later became the head of the French Association, that we need to go and take all of the Davis Cup teams and turn them pro. So Mike went from Great Britain, Barry McKay and I went from the United States, Andre Semedo went from Spain, Louis Ayala went from Chile, Robert Ayer went from France, and it almost worked. The ITF basically ran tennis for generations, for 100 years. And everything had to be done through your national association or through the ITF. And the ITF voted down open tennis. It was on the agenda, and it missed by 5 votes. So we're all thinking, you know, this next time around, it's going to happen. And with what the strategy that Jack had was, let's get these Davis Cup teams, let's turn all these guys pro, and we'll get open tennis. Well, 61, it missed by like 2 or 3 votes. And we are all signed under contract with Jack Kramer. There's probably 15 of us. And the thought was that maybe Jack Kramer was the person that was holding open tennis back in the vote, and that the ITF was afraid of him, and he was going to take over the sport. So Jack asked all 15 of us if we would let him out of the contract and form a players association, which was called the IPTPA. And I'm losing my thought here, but we did it. And actually, the players voted to have Mike, Barry McKay, and myself to be like player reps. And we decided that we would quit playing on this canvas court and let's start having tournaments. Let's be like the PGA of golf. And we did it. We started tournaments. We did it. And Mike was such an innovator, and he was so good. And we were saying, someday we're going to have a $100,000 tournament. We're going to play $100,000 tournaments. We're going to have our own stadiums. I remembered that. That's how basically Key Biscayne got built. Well, open tennis did not happen until 1968. But Mike was such a big part of keeping our group together, forcing the idea that we need to be professional. And we started having literally a huge circuit. We played in the States, we played in Europe, we played in Africa, we played in Australia. And it was on its way. And the real, the best thing that happened to us was Wimbledon. And this is a great trivia question because people do not know this. Wimbledon held a professional tennis tournament in August of 1967. And the chairman was a guy named Herman David. And he said, if you guys fill this stadium. I don't care. Sorry. Yeah. I don't care what the ITF says. You guys are invited back. Well, it was a huge success. I remember he walked in the locker room and said, you guys are all invited. That's 1968. That was open tennis. And it worked. And Mike helped that happen. Mike went on and worked for, Lamar Hunt. And I did tournaments there in St. Louis, which was a WCT event. Worked with him all those years. Then Mike left. I went to ATP. Mike was, I think, in the south of France. I found him. He said, you got to come back and help me at the ATP. When I left the ATP, he took over the ATP. He did that for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. He left there, went to run the ITF Davis Cup program. Made the most money that the ITF had ever seen. I was still playing a little bit when Mike joined WCT. And we were friends, we got along great, but we also had some issues. And one of the issues was I was not going to Iran to play a tournament. I said, Butch, I'm going to find you. I said, Mike, go ahead, find me. I'm not going to Iran. Especially now that I know that there were snipers. I got fined. And when I was running ATP, and Mike was running WCT, we had a little issue about the computer. And the WCT had a different format, and our thought, or my thought, was that you need a level playing field for the computer. And WCT had a different scale for how they did the prize money. We said we can't do that. Anyway, long story short, we got into major dispute. And we did not give them ATP points. So Mike went out and found another thing called the Nixdorf something computer. And he did his own. But he threatened to sue me, I don't know how many times. But I'll tell you one thing that Mike had was just a great passion for the sport. And I remember another argument I had with him. My yellow tennis balls aren't going to work. I can tell you that right now. What are you doing? I don't think you can find a white tennis ball. Anyway, I know this is a great friend.
Thank you, Butch. I think Mike told me in September that they eventually tried an orange tennis ball, and it didn't work in Jamaica. We've got to pick something different. And that's how that all came around. Our next speaker, another member of the Handsome Eight, they call these, from South Africa, played Davis Cup, won 5 titles, rose to a 4th in the world in 1965. ATP president, you'll recognize his voice, the soothing voice of tennis. From Miami, Mr. Cliff Drysdale.
So, 2 years ago, Mr. Chris Klauser in the back of the room, kicking and screaming, got me into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. It makes you think when you've got to say something to significant people. This is another such occasion that, about who got you to where you are. This is not about me, it's not about anybody else in this room, it's about Mike. But I will tell you that, as you said, Ken, your great channel may not be here if it nothing for Mike Davies, and certainly, I'm not sure how true that is, but certainly in my case, I would not be here if it was not for Mike. The quick story is that WCT was starting at that time what they were a syndicated series of television shows, because television was his passion, as you know. But he once said to me, I wouldn't be in tennis if it wasn't for television and to improve the product. But in those days, there was no cable TV, it didn't exist. It was before cable, so a syndicated series that we would go and tape a series of shows, and then these shows would be shown on ABC, NBC, CBS, whatever it was, where you could buy your way into the market. And Mike said, listen, Cliff, you're close with us, so maybe you could do this first series, and then we're going to get another couple of stars to do the next series of syndicated shows, which were all recorded, 13 shows at a time, during a week. So I said, Chief, thanks for the opportunity. I went there and I did the shows, and after that, Mike came to me and said, listen, you did well enough. Forget the other two guys, we're just going to keep you on. That was some 35 to 40 years ago, and I'm still here. And it is because of a man who became my beloved, who was then, and I was so enamored of his leadership in tennis, because all of the things that Butch said I know are true, because I saw them happen, because I was, as you said, one of the original handsome maid which he banned, and which he, oh, it's not that funny. You're going to age too, asshole. Just one other thought that I'll leave you with. I was fortunate enough to chauffeur Mr. Philip Brook around for the last week, thanks to Butch Buckles, who invites him down here and then leaves him, and I'm the one who's got to transport him around. And
Explain who Philip Brook is.
Philip Brook is the chairman of the All England Club, which happens to run the great Wimbledon Championships, the greatest championship that our sport produces. But he is thinking, in view of what, just thinking about this is not a commitment, of changing the all-white rule, considering what he's heard here today and the innovations that Mike over the years has made. I wouldn't hold him to that, but it's certainly something that's under consideration, as they say. I just want to leave you and say how happy I am to pay tribute to one of the truly great innovators in tennis, and somebody that I'm glad to say was one of my best friends.
Thank you, Cliff. I would love to be in a group called the Handsome Eight in my lifetime. Jimmy, you and I can start a group maybe? I don't know. We gotta find 8 more guys still, after all. You mentioned Philip Brook, and he does not want to speak today, but I do want to recognize who Philip Brook is. Could you at least raise your arm for us? Okay. President of the All England Club, that's all. Amazing resumes. And the next speaker also has an amazing resume as well. It would take me all day to read it. I'll just skip to his current title. The chairman of the International Tennis Hall of Fame, Chris Klauser.
Wow.
I hate following the handsome ones. And I'd be happy to translate anything you couldn't understand that they tried to say. It's a little hard to follow. I want to make it quite clear, I'm the former chairman of the Tennis Hall of Fame. Has been, washed up, history. I'm going to yield to Stan Smith, the current president of the Tennis Hall of Fame, in a moment. I was recently, about 7 months ago, at somewhat of a similar service for a friend of mine. I went with an elderly fellow that couldn't hear very well, and he said, halfway through the kind of this tribute, he said, you know, unless these people stop talking, somebody else is going to pass away. I'm going to keep that in mind. They say, they always say, what is your favorite thing as being the chairman of the Tennis Hall of Fame, former chairman? About in 2006, Tony Traber, who was then the president, said, Chris, you and I need to call up Hall of Famers before they get their letter and tell them that they were inducted. And it turned out to be my favorite thing. I remember calling Peachy Kalmeyer. Peachy says, Chris, this is unbelievable. Little did Peachy know she'd be spending the day and night with Andre Agassi in Newport. Oh yeah, Andre got to spend it with her. This spoke again. I remember calling Dodo Cheney in California. Dodo says, that's good, Chris. I want John McEnroe to induct me. I said, okay, will you arrange it? Let me know. We'll do it. She goes, I don't know John McEnroe. Okay. John McEnroe, to his credit, showed up and inducted Dodo Cheney. Cliff Drysdale, we are friends, despite what he may need you to believe. He said, how did you fix it? I said, I can't tell you, but you won by 2 votes. Thelma Coyne Long. Stan and I compared notes on this one. I was in the Sydney airport coming back from Melbourne. I called Thelma Coyne Long, the late Thelma Coyne Long, and she was quite candid. She heard my spiel. I said, you've been elected? She goes, it's about time. Then there was Mike Davies. I called Mike, and he was down here. And he said, this is very special. And it means an enormous amount to me. And every one of those people that I got to call during my 8 years, he kind of scribbled down what he said. And what Mike also said, after you tell them, you say, you can't really tell people besides me and your family because we would like to release the information from the Tennis Hall of Fame. And he said, can I ask you a favor then? I said, yeah. He says, can I tell Butch and can I tell some people at my club? I never thought I'd be at the club before the people he wanted to tell, and I'm honored to do so, to really pay tribute to a wonderful man who always told me to do something and go for it. And I will always hold those words very special. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back in I tell a personal anecdote now about our next speaker. Back in 1987, I was moving my life from the Northeast to the Southeast, and on the way down I-95, my car broke down on a hot afternoon, 1987, and I called my uncle, who at that point was #2 at Davis worldwide, Jim Collins, and I said, Uncle Jim, my car broke down on I-95 in South Carolina. He said, I'm at Hilton Head right now. I'll send a guy to come get you and bring you back to our place tonight. We'll get you a new car in the morning. Great. So 1 minute I was on the Interstate 95, hitchhiking to the rest stop, and 2 hours later I showered and was in a suit having dinner with our next speaker. It is my pleasure to bring up a household name in tennis, a legend, formerly ranked #1 in the world in 1972. Look who's here, folks. It's Stan Smith.
He's grown up. Wow. Yeah. I wasn't the handsome eight. I was a couple of years later the ugly eight. But, I did follow the career of some of these great handsome guys, and I'm here really here is kind of representing the International Tennis Hall of Fame, the president now, and of course Chris is my boss. And it was special to have Mike inducted in the Hall of Fame in Newport. I also wanted to just pay tribute to him because he did so much for our sport. And some people didn't know some of the things he did, and those that were close to the game really did. But, as he started the game, the WCT, I actually was there in 1973 and played in the finals in 73 after that great match in 71 and actually 72. But he was responsible for so much of my life and my career. WCT, then of course when he was with the ATP, I was one of the founders of the ATP, so we worked together, the ATP, and then the ITF, he started, he really made Davis Cup special, and that became a special part of my life as I saw that. I know that in the early days in WCT, they had some neat times. We went to Nigeria one time. He sent us down there. Our group was there. We had a coup, and one of the
guys came on the court with a gun. There's several guys with a gun, and stuck it in Arthur Ashe's ribs. Because Arthur Ashe was playing Jeff Borowiak at the time in the center court, and a lot of us were there watching, and Arthur was casually putting his racket in his bag as they told us all to leave the stadium, and they said, "Move it to Arthur," and he got a little quicker after that. We all ran out of the stadium, and we go to the ambassador's house in Lagos, and so the WCT had some special moments. One moment we're in the finals of the WCT doubles championships in Kansas City, and we're playing. Bob Lutz and I are playing against Freddie McNair and Sherwood Stewart, and Freddie had this issue with his heart. Occasionally kind of getting the fibrillation, I guess. And so we're playing. It's like 2-all in the second. We won the first, and Freddie starts, having some palpitations that he kind of got dizzy and passed out, and so we go up there, and he said, he's on the ground, and Sherwood's wife had some heart medicine, so she sent it down. She'd been there before with them. They play doubles all the time, and they gave him this medicine. But meanwhile, Bob and I were there, and Mike came over and said, "You guys have won the match." He can't play. And Freddie came up from the dead. And Sherwood said, "Freddie's all right. He's got this medicine. You can play it." And we're saying to Mike, "Mike, you just told us we won the match." And he said, "No, he's okay. You can play." So it was pretty hard because we kept thinking he was going to have a heart attack, as we kept playing. But anyway, Mike was decisive, and he was innovative, and he was a visionary. A lot of people talk about things, but he did things. And so I've got so much respect for what he did, and also very thankful for the fact that he did so much in the time when I was just coming up in the game. And if it wasn't for him, my tennis shoes might not even be around.
Thank you, Stan. Honored to have you here. Our next speaker is the former CEO of Pilot Pen, not the tournament, the entire company. Ron Smith, please join us. Ron Shaw.
This was called today to be a celebration of a life that has over the years become, I think, a phrase that is used. I've been to God knows how many funerals we've all been to, and I hear that constantly. And this one means it, though. This is really the celebration of a life. Somewhere in this room, I want to believe that Mike is here today, and he knows who's here. And I think he enjoys the humor of what we have all talked about. Knowing that I might be the last one to speak today, I wanted to do something a little different and look back over what is it that was written about Mike in the earliest days of his career. And I went to the internet. Everything's on the internet, as you know, and looked up Mike Davies. It started with the guy from the BBC by the name of Kevin Leonard, who did a big story, a big to-do for television about a year and a half ago. And he called it Mike Davies, the man who shaped modern tennis. And I just thought that was just so apropos for all that Mike had accomplished. But I wasn't happy enough with that, because I wanted to find something that was in writing somewhere about Mike in the earlier years. I found it. I found some stuff about Mike at the time that he was only 25 years old. You probably would not be shocked to know that the first word that was written in that which I found was controversial. That was the first word that showed up in this. And as a controversial 25-year-old Welshman, Mike Davies, the first British player to join the famous Jack Kramer troupe, and he had a fascinating career. Starting at the age of 12, he was on the public courts at Swansea. He rose to the position of British #1 at the age of 12. So we're not talking about somebody that just went out there and ball once in a while. We're talking about somebody that took this game very, very seriously at a very young age.
He went on with no lessons, by the way, no lessons whatsoever. He had a fiery temperament, this article had said, and it soon brought him into conflict with the LTA, the Lawn Tennis Association in the UK. There were times, because he got into so many controversies, where he was asked to leave. He went from tournament to tournament on his own, often going hungry and suffering a major hardship, just surviving. With the blossoming of his career, of course, so many marvelous things happened. And the various difficulties that he had encountered, developing strong feelings on the game itself, and that it should be better organized in his country. This guy's 25 years old by then, and he's telling everybody else how this game ought to be played. He really did have hard beliefs, and they didn't go down easily. He had a sincere conviction that tennis is a game to win, and he was never content to be considered a good loser. His impatience with the questionable decisions and the opponents, the gamesmanship of the frequent incidents, based on the fact that he had been in trouble so many times for voicing his opinions. But it wasn't just his opinions, and you've heard that said from some of the previous speakers. It was just his conviction of what it was that this game needed, and what needed to happen to make this game even better than it could possibly have been without him. And the article went on and on to talk about the various things that this young man did long before he had been known on the worldwide stage. And I was just so thrilled that eventually, when we were sponsoring the event in Connecticut, we knew that we had a promoter who was financially maybe not going to make it. And we went down to see Butch Buchholz to find out if we could convince him to take over. And Mike Davies was already working with Butch. And that was the first time that I met Butch. Butch picked us up at the airport. We went back to his office. We had the mayor of the city of New Haven with us, and one of the vice presidents at Yale University, all who were very, very involved in getting what had become at that time the Pilot Pen Tennis Tournament off the ground. And walked in, and then Butch introduced me to Mike Davies. And I met a man that I was convinced had no smile in him whatsoever. He was tough. He was a tough guy. And we shook hands, and it was kind of like, looking at me, I'm reading his mind. I wonder what this guy's here for. What do we need him for? We don't need to have another tournament in Connecticut. And I wasn't sure that he and I would ever become friends, that he and I could ever work together, and how wrong I was. But you didn't get to know Mike Davies on the first try. Not even in the first week, maybe not even in the first few months. But eventually we had the opportunity to work together. And so going back as I did, thinking about this event today, and knowing full well that Mike would have been thrilled that all of you are here, and of course all the big names in tennis who are with us today. It was just a marvelous experience for 19 years that I had a chance to work with him. And we went from a men's tournament to a mixed tournament with women, all of this that Mike played a key part in. And then after a while, we went back to a two-way event, men and women, and then ended up with women only. So we went around in quite a cycle and quite a circle. But the ideas that Mike had, I just used to love to sit in the office with him, or sometimes we go out into the outer areas during the tournament where we could just have a hot dog or something of that sort, just to listen to his experiences, or listen to the way he looked at the event, the way he could see what needed to be done. He was indeed one of a kind. In due time, we did become friends, and all the things that he did, as he would sit and describe them to me, or some of those I read about, Mike, why didn't you tell me that you're the guy that invented the idea of playing with a yellow tennis ball? Well, I didn't want to say anything. You know, it was always that low-key atmosphere. And he was just marvelous in terms of his ideas. And they went on and on and on. You heard earlier today, so many of them, that there would be no tennis today as we know it if it weren't for Mike. There was a time when Mike invited us to play tennis with him. I was probably in my third or fourth year of ever having picked up a tennis racket. And my daughter had been playing even longer than I. And so we went out to play with Mike. And we took him up to the club that we belonged to. Mike decided that it would be he against two of us. I was a little insulted, you know. And anyway, he watched so carefully as my daughter Susie served, and she served well. And then I served. I didn't serve quite as well. And that's all it took. At that point, I think Mike could have been standing there with a cigarette in one hand and just yeah, and it just went on, and you couldn't beat him. I mean, there was no way that you could beat this man. I don't think I'd ever been so humiliated in my life. And then there was another time when my son, who is the golfer in the family, my older son, and he was invited to play in Miami with Butch and with Mike, and he had I think he had a 14 or a 15 handicap at that time, so he was far better prepared to play golf, and they went out to play, and when he came home, and he said to me, "Dad, I have never been so humiliated in my life." Put me on the court with Butch Buckles and with Mike Davies. And he said, "What was I supposed to do? I play a pretty good game, but I don't play that game." You know, and it just went on and on and on. There was this magic about Mike when you were with him. It was just, you loved being with him. You loved hearing the stories. The stories that he told were just marvelous. Stories of how he succeeded and how difficult it was at a young age for him to be able to do what he did. So I'm here today just to reminisce about the marvelous times that we had with Mike. We had him to the house for dinner. We did a lot of things together over that 19 years that I knew him. So I didn't know him as a young man, as some of you did. But in those years that I did have a chance to get to know him very, very well, what a sincere guy he turned out to be. That guy that always wanted to stand in the background, and we would line up at the finals as we gave out the award. And Mike would not stand with us. He wanted to stand in the background, maybe near the scoreboard, and just mind his own business. And one year I got up all my nerve and introduced Butch and the mayor and whoever else might have been, all the dignitaries in Connecticut that were out there with us. And then I decided I was just going to go for it. And I introduced Mike. He said a lot of nice things about him leading up to his name. And the whole place stood up. People knew. People remembered where this guy came from. Huge round of applause. And as the applause was going on, Mike kind of walked out just a little bit. Didn't want to be out on the court all the way, but just enough that he could wave to the crowd. And as that applause was dying down, I remember him looking at me and going, I knew I was in for it. I was wrong, by the way. He did thank me. He thanked me very, very much. And it was just a marvelous friendship. What I learned from him, I was in a different business. I was running a pen company, but we were the title sponsor and loved working with Mike. So I know that somewhere Mike is here today, and Mike is looking, and Mike is understanding, and God knows he would appreciate all the marvelous little tales that have been told about him today. So I would just say that the man who we know, who came up with all of these magnificent ideas, all these things, the yellow tennis ball and all the other things that he came up with. What a great guy he was for the game, and what a marvelous human being he was to be a friend. So I think it's marvelous that all of you could be here today, and some of the big names in the game that came from all over today just to be here for this little ceremony. We're proud to have been a part of that for those years that we sponsored that event, and we thank all of you for being here today to appreciate and to definitely understand what a major factor that Mike Davies was for the sport and for all of us as individuals. Thank you.
Ron Shaw, CEO of Pilot Pen years ago, not that long ago. I was talking to Mike back in September during our interview, and I began with, I said, "So, yellow tennis ball, huh?" He said, "Yeah, I wish I'd gotten commission on that." Mike played at Bath and Racquet, and I'm a member there, and any time he played, people would often stop and watch and say, "That's the guy that got in the 1960 Wimbledon final in doubles, and also the yellow tennis ball." Whenever he played, people would invariably stop and watch, and also listen, because he had a bit of a grunt, didn't he, fellas? Something like that. Another person who plays locally and is a legend in tennis couldn't be here today, Marshall Happer, who was the COO of the Men's Tennis Council, which became ATP, ran all the major men's pro tournaments, COO of USTA. Marshall Happer, he lives locally in Venice, but he and his wife are right now in Australia because she's involved in the Australian Open. So he did make a few remarks that Ann Worcester is going to read for us.
For those of you who know Marshall, you know he's a lawyer, he's meticulous, he's an archivist, and I swear I think he called me or emailed me every single day this fall, because I had the sort of privilege of communicating Mike's passing and communicating the celebration of his life today to everyone around the world in tennis. And every day Marshall had someone else that I had to call or invite, and he was doing timelines of Mike's life. So he desperately wanted to be here today, and he asked Butch or I to read something he sent us, and guess who drew the short straw? Okay. My wife Karen and I were committed long ago to travel on January 4th to Australia, so we are very sad we cannot be present today in Sarasota to celebrate Mike's life. Karen and I would like to express our deepest sympathy to Mike's wonderful and caring wife, Mina, and Mike's children, Michael, Christopher, Shannon, and Darren, and his grandchildren. We want to thank them for sharing Mike with us. Mike Davis was my special friend, my colleague, and at one time my boss. I first met Mike in 1981 when he was still the executive director of WCT, and I had the privilege to work with him through his tenure as marketing director and executive director of the ATP. We have a lot of alphabet soup in tennis, don't we? It's really confusing. And later as general manager of the ITF, and even later as the tournament executive for the USTA US Women's National Championship in New Haven. That's the Pilot Pen. It's much easier to think of it as the Pilot Pen. And when Mike was chairman of the Men's Tennis Council, the governing body of men's tennis worldwide, he was my boss. In my last visit with Mike, about 2 weeks before he passed away, I brought him a copy of a published quote by Bob Greiner, who was the first executive director of WCT in 1967-68, in which Greiner candidly related WCT's disastrous beginning and how Mike helped save WCT in one visit in 1968 by recommending that WCT simply require that WCT tournaments put up the prize money and the production expenses instead of WCT paying for everything. As I left Mike after that last visit, he was still chuckling as he remembered his meeting with Greiner in 1968. His mind was as sharp as it had ever been. Mike succeeded Bob Greiner in 1969 as executive director of WCT, and by 1970, he had almost all of the top professionals under contract with WCT. In 1970, Rex Bellamy, the famous British tennis journalist, said in the Times of London about Mike, quote, "As executive director of World Championship Tennis, the 18-player strong professional group, He is probably at 34 the single most powerful man in the world game. Yet Davies earned his first money by picking potatoes, arrived in the United States 6 years ago without a job, and twice decided to go into business because he could not earn a living from professional tennis. Instead, he has decisively made it, close quote. So, as Mike in 1970, at age 34, was recognized as the single most powerful person in the world game, he would soon announce that in 1971, WCT would promote the first $1 million tour consisting of 20 tournaments for the top 32 players in the world and ending with a world championship. This was only the beginning of Mike's career in professional tennis, and WCT would compete with the ILTF's Grand Prix of Tennis every year thereafter, with innovation after innovation for WCT. Later, Mike would add more innovations for the ATP, then the ITF, and finally for the professional tournaments in New Haven. Mike is the only person in history to hold 3 out of 4 of the top jobs in professional tennis: Executive Director of WCT, Executive Director of ATP, and Managing Director of the ITF. We always joke that the only job he missed was the job of Executive Director of the WTA. Got that covered, don't we, Stace? But he did oversee for years the WTA tournament in New Haven, Connecticut, now known as the Connecticut Open. Karen and I were privileged to witness Mike's well-deserved induction into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport in 2012. Everyone on the inside of the game was well acquainted with Mike's contributions to our sport, and he had long ago earned everyone's admiration and respect. Throughout his life, Mike exhibited brilliance and thoughtfulness in business and in person. I have never had a better friend or a better colleague, and the game has never had a more gifted contributor. We will miss him, and we will never forget him. Marshall Happer and Karen Scott Happer.
Thank you. And a lovely couple, Marshall and Karen Happer, who live right here in the tennis area in southern Sarasota County. I think last time I saw white tennis balls was when I was at Cliff Drysdale's place last year. There was a pro-am at the Ritz on Key Biscayne. They actually passed out fresh white tennis balls still in the can. And I actually used those recently at Bath and Racquet. Everyone said, you can't see the white tennis balls. We've gotten so spoiled now by what Mike Davies brought to us. I want to bring back up Ken Solomon. He spoke to you very briefly earlier and showed us a little teaser video. I want him to speak again, and also he's going to show us about a 4-minute video. There's a trailer for a movie that's in production called The Barnstormers. And it's a fascinating video. You'll learn more about Mike and others in this room. So Ken, may you rejoin us.
Either that or we may show you the last episode of Modern Family, depending on how we go.
Whatever you show me, Ken. Okay.
Just make sure you vote for us. I feel like it's interesting. I met Mike 10 years ago at a U.S. Open Series meeting in Florida, and I was actually nervous to meet him because obviously I knew the history. And so I'm like the new guy in the room because everybody, and yet I felt I know him so well. He's been such a huge part of my life personally. I was struck, as everybody always is, by his incredible warmth. He just reached out and grabbed you, put the arms around you, and never let go. He was, in many ways, our editor at large. The phone would ring, and it was like, Ken, you know, and a lot of times it was really good. And sometimes it wasn't. But I have had a very nice career in the television business, which I'm more proficient at than tennis, for those that have been on the court with me. Klauser, I don't want to hear a word from you. And I've worked for some of the great minds in entertainment. I've worked for Barry Diller. They're crazy, but they're great. And David Geffen and Rupert Murdoch and Stephen Bochco and Dick Wolf and the folks who have entertained a lot of people, but what the common thread with those folks is when you're sitting with them, you realize there's a reason they're there. They really have a vision. They naturally understand what it means to communicate, what needs to be done. There is a clear right way to do it. And that was Mike. I mean, instantaneously, I remember upon meeting him, forgetting knowing all the history, that everything I heard I wanted to make sure I took note of. Because I think he was always right. He just always knew the right answer, and he was so willing to share it. So I don't know how many are familiar with this, but the founding father analogy was made several times, and it is a good one. It is a fair one, and it's an accurate one. Right now there happens to be a show on Broadway called Hamilton, which I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's sort of changing a lot. It is a remarkable piece of work. And it's about the founding fathers, but it's about Alexander Hamilton. And I think in the founding father panoply of the tennis world, that's who Mike was. Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant who came to this country and changed it forever. He rewrote the rules on everything. Hamilton created the Treasury. Hamilton created the Washington Post. He wrote 51 of the 85 Federalist Papers defending the United States Constitution. He never stopped working. And most of all, he was a rebel. And that's what Mike was. So the reason that I'm here is actually to introduce a piece of film that absolutely wouldn't exist, right now at least, without Mike. And over the last several months of his life, I was lucky enough to talk to him every week. Either he was calling me or I was calling him. And the story was the story that Butch, alluded to with the Barnstormers and the Handsome Eight and the birth of pro tennis in 1968, thanks to Wimbledon ultimately. And this is something we have been trying to do since the day I got here. And it's complicated. It's very, very difficult. And it's a story that has never been told. It is as if this country existed, but nobody knew what Jefferson and Hamilton and Washington did. And so we have, it's a pretty high bar to try to figure it out. But Mike, Butch, several others, but Mike, perhaps more than anybody else, was constantly pushing, goading, talking, working, saying, we have to do this. And upon learning of his illness, it was really the catalyst to say, I don't care anymore what we have to do. We're just going to do it. And it was his unfinished business. There's a song in Hamilton that says, history has its eyes on you. And Mike knew that you don't get to control who writes the history. And so we really felt that it was our obligation to try as best as we could to help write that history. And we had the luck and the opportunity to do it with him. Much of it shot right here. So this is still a work in progress. He has been with me right up until now because I'm seeing him in the editing room. I'm seeing him talking to the camera. I just have to tell you this. Whenever I would get on the phone with him, you would have thought he was 35 years old and just ran a marathon. It was the most remarkable thing. Butch called me to tell me, of his condition initially. And so, and I said, well, I need to, is it okay to call? He said, absolutely, you should call, please. I cannot tell you until the last minute. The energy that was coming out of the other side of the phone was the most remarkable thing. It was a life force, it was electric, and he knew what he wanted. So we're going to try to make sure that history begins to tell this story right at least the first time. But it is the story of the founding fathers of what became the Pro Tour. It is something that is extraordinarily important. It is remarkable that it hasn't been done. But most importantly, it is what he demanded had to be done, and he was right. He said, we didn't do all this for everybody to not understand what it is. So we're still making this. We are And we're shooting for the moon because that's what he did. I remember once he told me a story. I said, well, how did you do like the music? He said, oh, well, we just went to the store, bought the music, and we played it on television. I was like, yeah, you can't do that, Mike. The statute of limitations ran out, so I'm sure whoever, it's not going to sue him. So what we did today, because it's still in production, I mean, we're not even sure. I'm trying to get, we're talking to people like Robert Redford about narrating it, about trying to set the die straight, and I told him that, and he was very excited, and I'm hopeful. Bob is trying to figure out if he can do it now. It's just put together a little piece, and this is sort of a tease about the project itself, but as you will see, it opens, is replete with, and ends with Mike, and the film will be, when it is done, it will be dedicated to him. It will be dedicated to all that did the work and all that came before it, because that's what he wanted. He wanted their story told. It wasn't about him, but as we all in this room know, it was about him, because so much of it was him. So take a seat and get comfy, and we will show you just a couple of minutes of what I think is so important to him for so long, and we're proud to be able to do it.
I don't know how many of those players out there are interested in the history of the game. I just don't think that the majority of them have any clue as to what went on before them.
Tennis, one of the most popular sports in the world. With iconic athletes, superstars across the globe, and millions at stake. But in the beginning, the idea of professional tennis was just a dream.
It was sort of like a circus in a way. We traveled a heck of a lot.
Most of my travel was by hitchhiking. We were out in the wilds watching another car go by without picking us up, with a look on my face that basically said, well, you son of a...
They played Kansas the 1 hour the next night. Albuquerque the third night.
I played 29 matches in 31 days. I slept in 30 different beds.
The greatest matches took place in either a barn or a warehouse where you would have 25-watt bulbs.
Well, there are a lot of stories, 75% of them I can't repeat.
Told you 3 minutes, just like a kid. Be sure to put in your bag a hammer and nail.
Took his shoe off and hammered the nail in the wall. He said, well, we got a locker room that kid.
We played on a campus court, pulled tight with block and tackle. We put it over cement, we put it over wood, we put it on ice.
Well, we put the court over an ice rink.
I remember Davies was saying we put his foot on the ice and we went.
We were flying from Sydney and the left side of the wing. It was totally in flames.
Once you turn pro, there was no going back. And I don't think that any of us really thought that far ahead.
Margaret Court felt that we were prostituting ourselves by taking money.
You're selling yourself to play ball close to being a pro cop. They talked to us like we were wrestlers, that Ken Rosewell wins one night, Bode wins the next, and it's all fixed.
It was like they were evil guys taking money for playing tennis. And the real truth was that they were the best players.
I realized when I watched them play, I basically said, this is ridiculous. I said, there's not one player in the amateur game can beat these guys.
Playing amateur tennis, you know you're playing somebody that you can beat. But then when you're struggling for points in the pro ranks, you're a mess.
You're playing against a Wimbledon US Open champion, every day.
Like today, if I was playing every day with Federer, Nadal, and Djokovic every day, it was great.
I was a tennis rebel, as it were.
There was a strategy that was put together to force open tennis.
I want open tennis because I don't want to be called a amateur. It was crooked all the way through.
We were trying to convince the world that everybody should be able to play the same tournament.
The barnstormers were the guys like Rosewall and those guys played a lot of 1-2 non-stands.
That whole group in the 60s did sacrifice a lot.
Labor and Gonzalez lost about 10 years of their careers.
We played in a lot of cities that hadn't seen much tennis. We were pioneers trying to sell the game.
Created the opportunity for a bigger, better sport to come later.
They believed that the future of the game
And the growth in the direction and the professionalism of the game was more important than the moment.
As far as I'm concerned, Armstrong was as good as any other name. We played in a lot of bonds. So I think it's fine.
Wow, that gives me chills. That's the trailer for what will be a 90-minute movie documentary that we'll see on the Tennis Channel, thanks to Ken Solomon and his unbelievable production staff there. Well, we have heard from some of the legends of the game, and I want to hear now from some of Mike's friends. I know John Zachary has been very involved in this event. I'm looking for John right now. I'm sure he's here. There. Oh, there you are. John, you got to speak? You've been on the fence about that. You want to do it? Okay.
I wasn't sure I was going to speak. I mean, after all these people, I mean, nobody. But, I was nervous. I called my brother, and he said this morning, as long as you speak from the heart, don't worry about it. So that's all this is going to be. First of all, I want to thank Mina's gone.
I'm here.
Mina, that was very nice what you said. I really appreciate it.
In my heart, too.
Thank you. I want to recognize that 3 of Mike's 4 children are right here in the front row, coming from Hawaii, from Paris, and from Berlin.
Yes.
2 of his grandchildren are here. And I want to say, one of the good things that came, nothing good comes out of this, but I've gotten to know them, and they're really, really beautiful people. And so, I'm not here to talk about Mike, the tennis player. I'm here to talk about Mike, my friend, and Mike, the person. So, I mean, I feel like, to me, they're partially part of my family. So, I just wanted to start with that. I want to just talk a little bit about Florida, how Mike got here. And one last thing that Mike said for the last few weeks, he said, I want to make sure nobody speaks too long at this. Make sure so I promise you I'm not going to speak too long. But Mike around the turn of the century, he hated the cold. He was up in New Haven with Ann at the Pilot Pen or whatever it's called then. He came down here to visit Butch in Miami, rented a car, I believe he rented a car, drove up through the West Coast, stopped in Sarasota, loved what he saw, continued back up. The winters were horrible up there, thank God it wasn't in Albania. 2 years later, he found his way down here to Sarasota, which were those of us who know him, the tennis players, and which he loved. And I have to acknowledge how much he loved the recognition he got here from the Landings. They named the court after him out here. I don't know if you've got to see that. I can't tell you how many times we played on that court. Mike also spent a lot of time at Bath and Racquet, and just very briefly, the first time he went there, when you join Bath and Racquet, they give you 1 free lesson. Raj, are you here? The tennis pro, his name was Raj, and Mike got a free lesson. He went out there, and Raj came out with this thing of 200, 400, 500 balls. And Mike said, I don't think you're going to need all those balls. And then you see that they hit 1 ball for the next hour. And that's a true story. And then Raj immediately took Mike up to the front and introduced him to Joe Lockman. Joe? And Joe and Mike were a legend in their times. Everybody went to watch them play doubles. I think maybe they were something like 150 and 2. And I don't even know if they lost 2. But Joe was clearly a very special friend to Mike. And then special thanks to Kevin and Joe here, because Mike really, really appreciated everything that was done, and all the people who were doing this. I know Mina's made a lot of friends here as well. Ann, where's Ann? Ann, 2/3 of what else I was going to say, you said. I was going to say Ann collected hundreds of notes and emails, and I went through those and picked out what all the special things people said about Mike. I'm not going to repeat any of them because they've been said, but there's a couple that weren't mentioned. He really was humble, never bragged. That guy, you know, he loved to sing. Any of you who read his book, The Tennis Rebel, He said in that book, he would have preferred to be a professional singer than to win any tennis tournament in the world. And I actually was talking to Taju, his grandson right here, who's a Division I tennis player as well. And I have a song that Michael cut, which I was going to play. And then Taju was wiser than me and said, you know, if Mike wanted people to hear that, he probably would have played it for them. So respecting I'm so respectful of his privacy. He was unbelievably private. I was with him over the last couple of months almost every day, and there's so much that he just kept it. He never bragged. He was such a nice, I'm going to miss him so much. I love him. I told him he's a part of who I am. He was my mentor, and I called him Mikey. And Mikey, I love you, and I'll miss you.
Thank you, John, very much from the heart. I know you two are very close, and thank you for your remarks and all you did to organize today. Joe Bachman is not going to speak, but he's going to raise his hand. He's one of the tops in the world in the 75s, right? Wonderful. Local legend Joe Bachman. Jimmy Arias also said he didn't want to speak, but I want to recognize the former number 5 in the world right there, Jimmy Arias. There are others who would like to speak. I'll give you the opportunity right now to come up here. This is like an open mic portion, so please come forward if you want to say a few words about our dear friend. And while you're thinking that over, I'll tell you one last anecdote. But please come up. I was asked to host a thing called Wit and Wisdom for a thing called the Pines, a local nursing facility. And I was the moderator, and there was to be 3 panelists, and Mike was one of the panelists. And I hadn't really known him that well at that point. This was several years ago. And I thought, gosh, this guy is so accomplished, such a legend. I bet he won't be very nice. He's too big a deal to be nice, too. I soon found out I so loved working with him before and during that luncheon years ago. That's when our friendship began. So humble, such a modest man. Andre, perhaps? Okay. Others that want to speak earlier now are not wanting to. How about one more friend wants to speak about Mike? Anybody else have their composure to say a few words? Going once? No? Okay, then I want to thank you on behalf of the Davies family, for being here for a wonderful occasion, a life well lived. Not a memorial service, but a celebration. Thank you very much. That's what I can do.
Well,